ننزل له حديث فوضى
عمرة بنت عبد الرحمن.
عمرة بنت عبد الرحمن.
بارك الله فيك. عمرة بنت عبد الرحمن.
Is that of some companion or something?
Most people haven't. Amr bint Abd al-Rahman was the most important companion or student of Aisha radiallahu anha. Like we mentioned, to the point where when Umar bin Abdul Aziz ordered the different Waktub Hadith Amrah. He said, write down the hadith and write down the hadith specifically of Amrah. فإني أخاف دروس العلم وذهاب أهلها وأهله. He said, write down the hadith of Amrah, for indeed I fear the evisceration of knowledge and the death of its people. And he only specified Amrah. Right? Although there was many. And Medina was probably the most densely populated place in the world in terms of people of knowledge. But he specified Amrah. So Amrah bint Abd al-Rahman, I can't remember off the top of my head if her father was a Sahabi, or maybe he was from the Sighar al-Tabi'een, or from the Sighar al-Sahaba and the Kibar al-Tabi'een. But we're going to, inshallah, she's going to be one of the individuals who we study, inshallah ta'ala, in some level of detail. Taban, we don't want to give away too much before, we don't want to give away too much before we get to that. But her father was, I believe, Abdurrahman ibn Sa'ad al-Ansari. But we'll get to that, inshallah. طيب. So like I said, my brothers in Islam and my sisters, if there are any here, and especially if there's anybody online, make sure you have something to write with, طيب, and something to take notes with, whether that's paper, if you're old school like me, or if you have some sort of a device, okay, so that we maximize our benefit, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. طيب, let's begin so we can finish on time today, and then maybe take some question and answers if we have time for that as well. نعم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على مبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. So inshallah we begin today with the first of the biographies. Of course, short biographies. None of these biographies that we're going to do are going to in any way do any extensive justice to these individuals. We're only trying to dip our fingers, dip our toes, however they say in English. We're only trying to moisten our tongues, yes? Just to get a taste, just to get an idea of who these people were, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So the first tarjuma, or the first biography we're going to look at today, is the biography of the great Imam An-Nasa'i rahimahullah ta'ala. And like we mentioned, we're going to go backwards. So he is the last of these 6 main Imams of the 6 main books of hadith who passed away. Okay? So we're beginning with him. By no means the least amongst them in knowledge. As a matter of fact, like many of his contemporaries said, he was rivaled probably only by Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah. Some considered him an equal to Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala rahmatan wasi'ah. But he dies later in the 4th century, right in the beginning of the 4th century. And we'll mention the date specifically. So we begin with him. Rahimahullahu ta'ala rahmatan wasi'ah. فَأَقُولُ مُسْتَعِينًا بِاللَّهِ. So I say, seeking the help and aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was Imam al-Nasa'i. His name was Abu Abdurrahman. His kunya, Abu Abdurrahman. His name Ahmad ibn Shu'aib ibn Ali. Ahmad ibn Shu'aib ibn Ali al-Khurasani al-Nasa'i. Al-Khurasani al-Nasa'i. So his kunya is Abu Abdurrahman. His name is Ahmad. His father's name is Shu'aib. His grandfather's name is Ali. Al-Khurasani, meaning he's from Khurasan. غير Arabi. That's not Arab. Khurasan today would be Central Asia. And Khurasan, especially in the time where he was born to Khurasan, he was born to this place or in this place of Khurasan, okay, in a village called Nasa. Hence his attribution to that place in the Arabic language would be An-Nasa'i. Now the village or this small district or town doesn't exist anymore in its traditional name. It would be today in modern Uzbekistan. Modern day Uzbekistan, Central Asia. And it's interesting, Khurasan, which of course that delineation of land doesn't exist either. Sah? No, you won't find on the map, modern map, Khurasan. But this Khurasan was an amalgamation of different lands and different peoples. Today would be Uzbekistan, right? Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, Afghanistan. These are areas, Central Asia, what we call today Central Asia. In the language of the people of Khurasan, which is a mixture of different languages. They have their native languages, they have Farsi, because they were controlled by the Persians for centuries. It means the land where the sun rises. Khura meaning sun, san meaning rises, the land where the sun rises. Many scholars came from this land. Many. You will learn about Abu Dawood al-Sijistani, rahimahullah. You will learn about Imam Abu Abdullah al-Bukhari. You will learn about many others. Many others, some of them their nisbah or their ethnic background is from there, right? Whether it's from Bukharistan or from Nasa or wherever it may be. طيب. So Imam al-Nasa'i, Ahmad ibn Shu'aib, Abu Abdurrahman, was from this Central Asian place. Again, another thing important to know about 3rd century Central Asia, because he was born in the 3rd century, he dies in the 4th. Correct? So we have some ikhtilaf about when he was born. And you'll find that often about some scholars, especially back then. Why? Because often importance wasn't given to when you were born, the time and exact date. It was more important to know when you died and at what age. Jazakallahu khairan. So if you know what age you are when you died and when you died, then they can calculate when you were born approximately. Sahulala. The infatuation that we have in the West with date of births or dates of birth is a modern infatuation. It has nothing to do with the people of the past. That's why there's an khilaf about when the Prophet was born. That's why there's a khilaf about the Khulafa al-Rashidin when they were born. This was not an ancient infatuation with the ancient people. This is a modern infatuation. It's a pagan infatuation. Pagan and a modern infatuation. So, do you understand? It's not an Islamic infatuation at all. That might come to a surprise us to some of us. Rasulullah sallallahu wasallam alayhi, we know he was born Amul Fil. That's muttafaqun alayh. The year of the elephant. Okay, and we know that he was born after the attack on Mecca by the Abyssinian king, correct? Because they named him after, they named this the year after the event, not before it. Sahih. Yeah. That's what we know, and we know he was born on a Monday. We know he was born on a Monday, alayhi salatu wasalam. غير هذا فقد اختلف فيه العلماء اختلافا كبيرا. Other than these facts, the date of our Prophet's birth has been argued extensively. Most commonly narrated, or the most commonly thing that is transmitted, or not even transmitted, we should say, but the most commonly spread date is Rabi al-Awwal, and within Rabi al-Awwal is the 12th, correct? However, this is not a agreed upon date at all. So we say to the Ahlul Bid'ah and to some of those who made mistakes and they celebrate the Prophet's birthday alayhi salatu wasalam, we say to them, who narrated to you that the Prophet was born on that day? Bil ittifaq. We don't have that information. Some say Rabi al-Awwal, some scholars say it was Muharram, some scholars say it was Ramadan, some scholars say it was Dhul Hijjah. There's only 12 months out of the year and there's about 27 riwayat. So you could do the math on that one. Sahih. At least 27 riwayat, if not more. I might be even mistaken. It might be a bit more than that. Allahu Alam. Even if there was 20. Let's lowball it. Yeah? So this infatuation with dates of birth, okay, is not an ancient infatuation, nor is an Islamic infatuation. It is a pagan and it is a modern infatuation. Now, not to say that the scholars didn't preserve the dates of birth of some scholars, especially when the ilm al-hadith became, or the knowledge of hadith became something widespread. Okay, 100%. So that we know who narrated from who and when and where it was impossible. So if somebody was born in the year 150 or 270 and he's narrating from somebody who died in the year 200, that's problematic, correct? Fil ilm al-hadith, we're like, you were born after he died by 70 years. Kaif, how are you narrating from him? That means there's a break in the chain. Labud. Whether he admits it or doesn't admit it, whether it's said or not said, there's a break in the transmission there. I never met you. It's impossible for me to meet you because I was born in the year 270 and that person died in the year 200. So, but again, these things can be backward calculated. Sahih. If I know a scholar, his age and the year that he died, then I can calculate to enough precision when he was born. Make sense or doesn't make sense? However, you see this about ancient people, prophets, Sahaba. When they were born, it's estimated. It's what? Estimated when they were born. Okay? Taban, of the 27 narrations of our Prophet's date of birth, some make sense and some don't make sense. So I'm not trying to say that all of them are equal in their, authority. No, right? But we don't know 100% for sure because it wasn't written down, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But we'll get to the date of death, we know for sure, of Imam al-Nasa'i rahimahullah. So this place of Khurasan was a hub of Buddhist thought. Okay, this is something we should understand about ancient Khurasan or Central Asia. Central Asia was the Mecca of Buddhism. Okay, it was like the Mecca of Buddhism. Okay, many scholars of Buddhism lived there, died there. They're saints and they're sages and whatever. So Imam An-Nasa'i, like Imam Al-Bukhari and others who were born and raised in Central Asia, they grew up in this environment. And that's important to know because we sometimes think our children, or some of us, if we're born here in Darul Kufr, in the lands of the disbelievers, or surrounded by disbelievers, or whatever it may be, that somehow we're in a unique position. But some of the greatest scholars that ever lived and walked this earth, as we see here, were born in the strongholds of disbelief. Central Asia at that time, like I said, was flooded with Buddhism. Okay? So Imam An-Nasa'i, born in Nasa, this village or city of Nasa in Khorasan, Central Asia, modern day Uzbekistan. Okay? They say around the year 215 Hijri. The year 215 Hijri. This is the most authentic narration we have of his date of birth, as noted by Imam al-Dhahabi and Sir A'lam An-Nubula. And you'll hear this name of this book often. One of the greatest and largest compendiums we have in the Sirah of the Salaf, specifically the Salaf who were mushtaghalina bil ilm. They were busy with knowledge. Narrators of hadith, fuqaha, ulama al-lugha, the scholars of Arabic language, so on and so forth. Imam al-Dhahabi, Shamsuddin, rahimahullah, the student of Imam Ibn Kathir and Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, he wrote one of the greatest compendiums we have, extensive. The volume, at least the print that I have at home, is somewhere around 20 something volumes. Some prints printed up to about 30 volumes, depending on the print you get. Okay, so 215 Hijri. He's born around the year 215 Hijri. Imam An-Nasa'i rahimahullah ta'ala, from his notable qualities is that at the very young age of 15, he begins to travel for knowledge. He begins to travel for knowledge. So he travels within Khurasan. He travels within Khurasan, Central Asia. So he leaves Nasa, he goes to different places in Khurasan, right? And he seeks knowledge from the scholars of Khurasan, which were many at that time, as we will learn. And then he leaves Khurasan, his home district or his home country or his home area where he knows the language, and he goes to Hijjaz, to Mecca and to Medina. He goes to Egypt. He travels to Iraq. He goes to Sham, to Syria, Palestine, to modern day Syria and Lebanon. Eventually, he settles in the city of, or in the country of Misr, Egypt, modern day Egypt. And he spends the majority of his life in Egypt. He spends the majority of his life, rahimahullah ta'ala, rahmatan wasi'ah, in Egypt. And it was said about him, لا نظير له في عصره في مصر. There was no one who equaled him or rivaled him in knowledge in Egypt during his time. Although he doesn't die in Egypt, but he spends the majority of his life living, learning, and then teaching in Egypt. طيب, some of the shuyukh of Imam An-Nasa'i rahimahullah, Ahmad ibn Shu'aib, Abu Abdul Rahman An-Nasa'i rahimahullah, he has many Imam al-Dhahabi, and I'm just reading from notes here, right? When I looked in Sirah Alam Nubula, and I counted, and I had some trouble counting, because my eyes are a bit tired today. You're looking at about, Imam al-Dhahabi mentions, somewhere between 75 to 80 scholars that he took from. 75 to 80 scholars that he took from. And this should not surprise us, as Imam Malik, rahimahullah, Malik ibn Anas, who we will also study his life, who never left Medina. He lived and he died in Medina. He went for Hajj, but he never, famously, this is a famous thing about Imam Malik, he only studied from the scholars in Medina. That's why they say the madhab of the people of Medina, it filtered down into Imam Malik, the way of the people of Medina. That's why Imam Malik, his madhab is called the way of the people of Medina. He famously studied from 400 scholars. 400 scholars. So Imam al-Nasa'i, who's living now more than 100 and something years after him, it shouldn't surprise us, because this is those are his salaf. The salaf of Imam al-Nasa'i, right? His predecessors are Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Shafi'i, rahimahumullah. And then Imam al-Dhahabi, after listing about 75 to almost 80 scholars, he says, وَخَلْقٌ كَثِيرٌ. Right? He stops writing names, and then he says, and a large amount of people who he doesn't name them, because he's like, it's too long, it's too many. So he stops at 80, and then he says, وَخَلْقٌ كَثِيرٌ, and a great amount of others. So I'm saying to you, my brothers and sisters in Islam, that the 75 to 80 is not everyone. It's not who? Everyone. It's just the most notable amongst them. From his shuyukh and his teachers, Ishaq ibn Rahuwiya is the correct pronunciation. You see it in English written, Rahaway. Rahaway. You can guess by his name that he's also not originally what? He's not originally Arab either, from the teachers of Imam Ahmad. You find this quite often the case. Yeah? But the correct pronunciation, as has been transmitted by the scholars of hadith, is Rahuwaya or Rahuya. Rahuya. Yes, my brothers.
No, just the name I'm trying.
Ishaq ibn Rahuya. Yes. Something I learned, I remember I was sitting with Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari, hafidhahullah ta'ala, and he was reading hadith and explaining, changing the narrations, and Ishaq ibn Rahawiya came up. In my head, his name was Ishaq ibn Rahawi. Either way, it doesn't sound Arab. Either way, it sounds a bit off to say it. But when he said it, I was like, what's that? And I learned, as you learn every single day when you sit with the scholars, the importance of at-talaqi, to take knowledge from its men and women. He said, you find this in this book, in that book, and scholars, it's called Dabt al-Asma. It's a whole knowledge in the ilm al-hadith. Dabt al-Asma. Hafidh al-Nawawi rahimahullah has a book about the shuyukh al-Bukhari, how to pronounce their names, right? Because Jubair or Sa'id and Su'aid are written the same way in Arabic. Sin, Ain, Ya and Dal. Sah or la? Yes or no? Yeah. How do I pronounce it? Is it Sa'id? Is it Su'aid? Right? I don't know. Hamid and Humaid are written the same way. So in Ilm al-Hadith we have what's called Dabt al-Asma, which is the codification or the preservation of nutq, or the pronunciation of names. So that you don't think those are two people. Right? So you don't think they're what? Two different people, they're the same person. So he said, however, we learned this we learned this from reading hadith to our teachers. We would say, قال حدثنا إسحاق بن راهويه, and he was like, راهويه. Like, راهويه? Because it's a Farsi name, it's a Farisi name, so it's not pronounced the way it's written in Arabic. Right? Just like Sibawayh, the great scholar of Arabic who was also Persian. His name's Sibawayh. It's written in Arabic, but it's not an Arabic word. Sibawayh in Farsi means Seb. If for those of my brothers who know Urdu, Seb is apple. So the one you say Sibawayh, you mean the one who's apple cheeked. I mean he had red cheeks. So that it was his nickname that he had. So you wouldn't know that if you tried to just say it in Arabic. So these things are important, my brothers and sisters in Islam. Anyways, I tend to go off track. You brothers, you gotta keep me on track, yeah. I'm not even joking. Well, I'm warning you right now. I do that a lot. I go on tangents, right? My wife likes my tangents, but you guys might not. Yeah, Bismillah. They might be beneficial, but I'll go off track. Yeah, so just remind me sometimes. So it's from his shuyukh, Ishaq ibn Rahuya, or Rahaway, but Rahuya is a correct pronunciation. وهشام ibn Ammar, and Muhammad ibn Nadr, and Abu Tahir al-Sarh, and Ishaq ibn Shaheen. These are great imams of hadith. Great imams of hadith. These are his teachers. And again, like I'm saying, there's 80 names here. We have to be selective. Amr ibn Ali al-Fallas, amazing scholar of hadith, major scholars of hadith. Muhammad ibn Bishar, wa Mahmud ibn Ghaylan, Hannad ibn Saray. Hannad ibn Saray, very important, or Sari, is correct pronunciation. Hannad ibn Sari, from the great A'imma of Hadith, narrators of, you'll find his names in 6 books of Hadith. Yaqub al-Duraqi, or Dawraqi. And وخلق كثير, there's so many names. Who do Ali ibn Hajar, or Amr ibn Uthman al-Himsi. These are like pillars of Hadith, in Hadith narrations. So he narrated from great scholars of hadith. Famously, Qutaybah ibn Sa'id, from the shuyukh of Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah, and others, and others. Like I said, we have 80 names, can't go through all of them. طيب, from his students, from the students of Imam Abu Abdurrahman Ahmad ibn Shu'aib al-Nasa'i rahimahullah, Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi. Some of you might have heard his name. Yes? Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi, who wrote Aqidah al-Tahawiyya. Yes?
He was a Hanafi.
He was a Hanafi. Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi al-Hanafi. Not only was he Hanafi, he was a Shafi'i first.
Okay.
ثم تحنف. He was a Shafi'i scholar, and then he adopted the Hanafi madhab. And he was a scholar of hadith, one of the great scholars of hadith. Like, again, just not enough time. Again, tangents, be careful. Imam al-Tahawi was an ayah in hadith. Okay? He wrote a book in hadith called Mushkil al-Athar. Has anybody heard of this hadith book? You know, it's not very a commonly mentioned hadith book, at least not in the West. But Mushkil al-Athar, Imam al-Tahawi wrote thousands of chains of narrations which is not the impressive part, which is already impressive. It's not the impressive part, but that's already impressive. Thousands of chains of narrations, and in this book of hadith, his main purpose was to deal with the different narrations, different wordings of the same narrations attached to those thousands upon thousands of chains of narrations. Okay, so one hadith might have, let's say, 15 chains of narrations. Yes? You guys understand isnad, yes? So for example, Imam Abu Dawud narrates a hadith on the authority of Abdullah bin Umar that the Prophet said this. Okay? But Abdullah bin Umar wasn't the only one who heard him. Abdullah bin Umar heard him, Ali heard him, Abdullah bin Abbas heard him, let's say. Okay? I'm just giving you a random example. But they all saying the same thing. Okay? Each one of those are considered a separate hadith. Even though they're all saying the same thing, they're all considered different hadith. And then if you just take one of those hadith, let's say Abdullah bin Umar said, the Prophet said. And let's say 27 people heard it from Abdullah bin Umar, his students. Correct? They all narrate from Abdullah bin Umar the same thing. Except 6 of them. They add or subtract a word. Each additional wording or subtracted wording becomes its own narration. Do you see how it spider webs out? Okay. So Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi wrote his book Mushkil al-Athar, and he was basically taking chains of narrations where people are like, that doesn't make sense. How did the Prophet say this and this at the same time with different wording? So he was Mushkil al-Athar, meaning the things that we find troublesome in the narrations. And so he was basically untangling the web for you, showing you when he said this, when he said that, where he said this is incorrect, this is thousands of narrations upon thousands of chains of narrations, all from memory. He wrote that book from his hifz. And then you might say, oh, but how do we know he didn't make mistakes? Because the book has been checked again and again and again and again and again for over 1,000 years. And we still have the book, and the book still holds up. And not to say there's not mistakes in it, Sahulillah, but this is to give you a little taste of who Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala rahmatan wasi'ah was. And he was from the students of who? Imam al-Nasa'i. From his students was Abu Ali al-Naysaburi, again one of the pillars of hadith, one of his main students, spent a lot of time with him. Let's see, somebody else that the brothers would know. Let's see here. Tahawi, Hamza ibn Muhammad al-Kinani, maybe some of you know him. Abu al-Qasim Sulaiman ibn Ahmad al-Tabarani, not to be confused. Tabarani, this place was also a place where it produced a lot of scholars. Okay, this scholar, as important as he was, scholar of hadith, we have Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Naysaburi, again Muhammad ibn Musa al-Ma'muni, all great scholars of hadith. Okay, but the most notable, I think you guys would take away, is these two names, Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi and Imam Abu Ali al-Naysaburi. Okay, these two names we should definitely know. They will come up. These two names, they will come up outside of this class. Tayyib. Again, after mentioning about 30 names, Imam al-Dhahabi says, وَخَلْقٌ كَثِيرٌ وَخَلْقٌ كَثِيرٌ, and many others other than those who are mentioned here. Tayyib, what was the aqidah of Imam Abu Abdurrahman Ahmad ibn Shu'aib al-Nasa'i rahimahullah. The aqidah of Imam al-Nasa'i rahimahullah was al-aqidah as-salafiyya as-sunniyya. Famously, Imam al-Nasa'i was a great defender of the aqidah of Ahl Sunnah. And we'll take, again, because of the shortness of time, just one example from that. Okay? But Imam Ibn al-Mubarak was asked once, and this name is also very important, we will study his life, Abdullah Ibn al-Mubarak, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was asked once, someone once said, Man za'ama anna qawlahu ta'ala innani ana Allahu la ilaha illa ana fa'budni, Surah Taha, makhluq, fahuwa kafir. It was said to Imam Ibn al-Mubarak, right? Somebody says, whoever says that Allah is saying in the Quran, verily I am Allah, there is no deity worthy of worship and truth except me, so worship me alone, is a created statement, then that person is kafir. Why? I'm asking you, my brothers, why? Why is it kufr to believe that this is not a statement of Allah?
Because it is a speech of Allah. Quran is a speech of Allah.
Okay.
Not created.
طيب, but that's a creedal statement you made. But why is, if somebody says this ayah is created, or gives an example, right? Why do I say, if the Quran is created, it's not the speech of Allah, right? Anybody who says that, then this ayah is also not the speech of Allah. Anybody who says this is not the speech of Allah is kafir. Why though? Why this ayah specifically? Innani ana Allah, la ilaha illa ana, fa'budni. Verily, I am Allah. There is no deity worthy of worship and truth except me. So worship me alone. Whoever says this statement is created is kafir. Why?
Is it due to the nature of what is being said, that Allah is speaking?
Ahsant. Can anyone other than Allah say, Innani an Allah, verily I am Allah, La ilaha illa ana, there's nothing worthy of worship and truth except me, fa'budani, so worship me. Can anyone say this? Can anyone have the haqq to say this? Whether he is a prophet, messenger, angel. Can anyone say this other than Allah? No. And I ask this question to our brothers and sisters who adhere to any other aqidah other than the aqidah of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah when it comes to the Quran. Like the Asha'ira, like the Maturidiyya, who are sisters of the Jahmiyyah when it comes to the belief in the Quran. They say, and this is not something I'm accusing them of, I'm not trying to throw dirt, although this is very dirty, but it's what they say. It's not like me throwing dirt from the ground, it's from their speech, I'm just returning it back to them. Something like for one of their scholars like Hamza Yusuf in the West, he's no doubt from the scholars of that group, the Mutasawwifa, the Asha'ira, although he's famously said himself, he no longer adheres to the Ash'ari Aqidah. He says, if I stand before Allah, I stand before Allah upon the Aqidah of Imam al-Tahawi. Which is a nice thing to say, it's an improvement. However, then he defends the Ash'ari madhab, so, right? That's like me saying I believe 2 + 2 is 4, but 5 is okay too. That doesn't make any sense. If you believe that the truth is with Imam al-Tahawi in Aqidah, then you should hear. Then why are you defending the Ash'ari? The Ash'ari definitely don't go. They go against Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi in his Aqidah, 100%. Especially when it comes to the Quran. And as explained by Hamza Yusuf again and again and again. So it's a very odd statement. Anyways, the Quran is not the speech of Allah. That's his statement. The Quran has a created and an uncreated aspect to it. That's his speech. You can go and listen to, don't do it, but if you want to verify what I'm saying, then you can listen to his explanation of Surah Yasin, or his explanation of whatever. He has a lot of kalam on the Quran, and he mentions that. I even have it on my Twitter account, where I obviously tore that apart, but I clipped a clip and I put it there. And so the standard Ash'ari position, like the standard Jahmi and the Maturidi position, is that the Quran is not the speech of Allah. It's ibaratun an ma'ani al-ilahiyya. It's a interpretation of divine meanings that are from Allah. Those are not created. But the speech, the words of the Quran are created. So I asked my Ash'ari and Maturidi and just generally unguided Muslim brothers and sisters, then whose speech is it then? Who said this? Who said to the Prophet, Innani ana Allahu la ilaha illa ana fa'budni? Hat al-ajwiba. Give me the answers. I've tried to read even. I've read some of the Ash'ari scholars of the past to see if they had an answer to this, and there's nothing. If it's not the speech of Allah, then who said it? Did Jibreel say it? Did the Prophet say it? Whose words are the Quran? Who interpreted it? Ya Hamza Yusuf, Ya Aba Iwad, or whatever his kunya is. Hadan Allah wa iyah. May Allah guide us and him. Ameen. Whose words are the Quran then? Imam al-Nasa'i famously, when this was narrated to him, right? So Ibn al-Mubarak, obviously, when he heard this speech, he said, Sadaq. He said he spoke the truth. Anybody who says that anyone other than Allah said these words, he's kafir. Mind you, we're not making takfir of the Ash'ari, we're not making takfir of the Maturidiyya. We are not. We are not. The standard position of Ahl Sunnah is that they are Muslimun Dhul, misguided. Okay? Standard. Yes, there might be some scholars amongst them who, their Islam is questionable, maybe. But as a ta'ifa, as a group, we do not make takfir of the Ash'aris or the Maturidis. Okay? Very important to know. Ahl Sunnah, we don't rush to takfir. We don't rush to kick people out of Islam. We're very careful. Very careful with this. Even if they accuse us of it. Right? You hear people like Hamza Yusuf and them, they say, oh, they call us kafir. Show me where. From Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Abdul Wahhab, and those who came before them. Show me where any scholar of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah made mass takfir of the Ash'aris or the Maturidis. You will not find it. You will not find it. At all. But you will find A'immatul Ash'a'ira, the Imams of Ash'ariyah and the Imams of Maturidiyah, making mass takfir statements on Muslims. Forget Ahl Sunnah. Do you understand? And this is not the place or the time to go into details about that. But when this was narrated to Imam al-Nasa'i, this little story was narrated to Imam al-Nasa'i, he famously said, وَبِهَذَا أَقُولُ. He said, this position of Abdullah bin Mubarak, بِهَذَا أَقُولُ. That's what I say. Right? Famously, Imam al-Nasa'i stood up for the haqq. He wasn't somebody who shied away. When he was spending time in Damascus, in the famous Umayyad Masjid, there were people there who were nawasib. They were people who had some ill feelings towards Ali radiallahu anhu, which is a bid'ah. It takes you outside the fold of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And they preferred Muawiyah radiallahu anhu over Ali. And so when he saw this, he famously wrote Fada'ilu Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. It's a famous book of hadith which still exists today. The virtues of Imam or Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. And then he was accused of tashayyu'. He was accused of being a Shi'i. And he simply was upholding the standard belief of Ahl Sunnah, which is the best of creation after our Prophet is Abu Bakr, and then Umar, and then Uthman, and then Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu, wa anhum ajma'een wa ardahum. But he was accused of being Shi'i and he was chased out eventually of Damascus. But that's a story for another time. But it ends up being the reason why he's chased out of Damascus. He's rushed out of Damascus and he flees. Some narrations say to Mecca. And the others say Palestine. Some scholars say that he went to Mecca and then he went to Palestine afterwards, which is possible. Which is what? Possible. But the correct and the most authentic narration we have from Abu Ali al-Naysaburi, who he said was who? One of his students. His main narrator of his hadith, close student of Imam al-Nasa'i. He says that Imam al-Nasa'i rahimahullah, after the fitna that happened with him in Dimashq, in Damascus, in the Masjid Umayyah or the Masjid al-Umawi, he fled to Ramla, which is Palestine. And he died in Palestine. And his grave today is there in Baytul Maqdis. It's there in Jerusalem, his grave. Rahimahullah ta'ala, so he's buried in that blessed land of Palestine. May Allah Azza wa Jal free it and protect its people and give them izzah and nusra. Ameen. So, according to Imam Abu Ali al-Naysaburi, he died in Ramla in Palestine. طيب. Imam al-Nasa'i rahimahullah, from his attributes, physical attributes and his character, Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah, he says, كان النسائي شيخا مهيبا مليح الوجه. He was a sheikh he had dignified, venerated, somebody who's mahib in English. Again, we're going to mention words, a lot of words we don't use anymore, but which we need to kind of kindle in our English language. Okay? When a person has haiba, does anybody know what haiba means? Charisma is a part of it. But when I say rajulun muhib, when a man is, especially a man, women can have this attribute too, but it's a very masculine attribute. But women can have it too. Aisha had it, radiallahu anha, Fatima had it, radiallahu anha, and Amra had it, rahimahullah, and many women have it. It comes with a man when they have dignity, when the people are in awe of you, right? When they have, there's a really good English word that's I'm missing in my mind right now. As I was speaking, it left my brain.
Veneration?
They're venerated, no doubt. But it's like to have haiba is to have to be awestruck, to incite awe in another person. When you look at them, yeah, when you look at them, you're like, whoa. Like you lower your head, you feel
their presence.
Yeah. Like, I'll give you a great example, and maybe some of us can relate to this. May Allah Azza wa Jal give us all afiyah, ameen. When you ran a red light, you get the picture, from the back, you get the picture, you got to go to the court date. The judge is standing in front of you and you're kind of like your head down, like, oh man. That feeling you feel because that person holds position. All rise for the honorable so-and-so, and you got to stand up, and then they come and they say, be seated, and everybody sits down. The judge, the imam of the masjid, the khatib, the amir, the sultan, the malak, the this, they have haiba. Sah? The alim, he or she, alima, they have haiba. It's like a reverence. Their presence, it demands reverence. So he was a sheikh that he has like this reverence. He was a person when you saw him, and we'll read about some people in this of the past who people who used to look at them and they would make tawbah. Can you imagine? Somebody would walk with such dignity and such prophetic presence that people would see them and then they would just be like fall to their knees. It'd be like, Ya Rabbi, astaghfirullah. That existed. And not to say it doesn't exist today. I've only ever met one person in my entire life who is very difficult for me to look in his eyes. Very difficult to look in his eyes. And he was our Shaykh al-Allama al-Muhaddith Abu Muhammad Rabi' ibn Hadi al-Madkhali rahimahullah ta'ala rahmatun wasi'ah. Humble man, but small, but gentle, very soft spoken. But when you were around him, the energy you felt, and it wasn't because he was tall or dark or he was pretty handsome, but it was just the ilm that he carried. The ilm was ajib jiddan. And I can tell you so many stories, but I won't for now. Rahimahullah ta'ala rahmatun wasi'ah. A great loss to our ummah. طيب. Malih al-wajh. Scholars say this was it's like an Arabic saying. Malih al-wajh can mean different things. It can mean that he was fair-skinned, which is also something known about Imam al-Nasa'i because he was a bit fair-skinned. They called him Zahir al-Dam. Zahir al-Dam meaning like you could see his blood from behind his skin. It's just a way of saying that he was light-skinned. You can tell people from Khurasan today are light-skinned people. Yeah, if they're light-skinned, they're light-skinned. You see people from Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, they have lighter skin. So Zahir al-Dam, Malih al-Wajh, it's also going to say that he was pleasant-faced. That means to make he was smiled a lot, and he was kind and easy to approach. Husn al-Shayba, or Hasn al-Shayba, meaning somebody who had gray hair, but it suited him well. And I think gray hair suits most of us pretty well, inshallah ta'ala. Right? It's also said about him, كان النسائي, Imam al-Dhahabi continues to mention, he says, نضر الوجه, he was bright-faced. People see him and you could see the nur in his face. مع كبر السن, even though he was old. His skin was not wrinkled, it was clean and bright. يؤثر لباس البرود النوبية. He used to like thicker clothing, winter clothing, he liked it. Thicker clothing, green clothing, khadar, he liked the green clothing. كان له 4 زوجات, and he had 4 wives. Rahimahullah ta'ala, he had what? 4 wives, bringing to life the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and bringing to life the order of our Prophet ﷺ to marry women and to procreate, to have children. Okay. Imam Sa'id ibn Jubayr radiallahu anhu, rahimahullah ta'ala, from the students of Ibn Abbas and other Sahaba, major tabi'i, we'll probably learn about him as well. Imam al-Bukhari narrates in his Sahih that Sa'id ibn Jubayr was once with Abdullah bin Abbas, the cousin of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was once with Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu anhuma. فقال له يا سعيد هل زوجت? So he said to his student, hey Sa'id, are you married? So Sa'id said, no. So he said, فَعَلَيْكَ بِالزَّوَاجِ. He said, so you should get married. فإن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال خير هذه أمة أكثرها نساء أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. He said, you should get married. For indeed the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم, he said, who's saying this? Abdullah bin Abbas is saying that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said, or it's narrated that the correct narration is that Abdullah bin Abbas said himself. He said, فَإِنَّ خَيْرَ هَذِهِ أُمَّةً أَكْثَرُهَا نِسَاءً. That the best of this ummah are those who have the most wives. And does that mean just marry women and treat them irresponsibly? Why though? Okay, let me ask the brothers. Why? Why did Abdullah bin Abbas and say this, or in some narrations he attributed back to the Prophet ﷺ? But why? Why would this be true?
Could it be that the one with multiple wives that he's sustaining them, he's dealing with them justly, and that in itself shows that.
Ahsant. What's your name, Akhi?
Jermaine, Abdur Rashid.
Abdur Rashid, Jermaine, Abdur Rashid. Which one do you prefer?
Abdur Rashid.
Abdur Rashid. Jermaine is good too. It's a halal name, no problem with that. You're a convert, brother?
Yeah.
A lot of converts are told as if it's Bible, excuse the terminology there, Western saying, as if it's like wajib, you have to change your name. This is an absolute and 100% incorrect thing. Yeah, you have to change your name if your name is like Satan, right? Or Christ, or something. You can't be Messiah, or something like this. Your name has to have shirk, or some sort of qubh, or ugliness, or evil in it. But if your name is regular, if your name is Mark or Matthew or David, you don't have to change it to Mikael or Dawood. You can, or if your name is Jermaine, you have to become Junaid. You stay Jermaine, no problem. But whatever you prefer, brother, yeah, Junaid or Jermaine or Abdur Rashid, ahsant. That is correct. The reason why Abdullah bin Abbas said this, or it's attributed to the Prophet that he said it, the reason why that's a measure of a man's worth in Islam is because, not because it's the women are trophies, na'udhu billah. Absolutely wrong. The reason why that's a measure of a man's masculinity and his sulh and his uprightness, if he's treating his wives correctly, is because that takes an extreme amount of discipline, an extreme amount of sabr, an extreme amount of hilm, forbearance, gentleness, to deal with 4 different women, or 2, or 3, or even 1. But imagine 2. Some of us were overpowered by just 1. But imagine 2 different women, 2 different likes and dislikes, emotional capacities, right? Desires, dreams, aspirations, unique, personalities. And you have to cater to both. Not to one and then complain to the other one. No. Right? So that takes a specific kind of man. Right? And I remember one time I was sitting with one of our shuyukh in Medina, Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Rashaydan, who was the reader of Sheikh Abdul Muhsin Abbad, and he was giving a dars in hadith. And he said, hey, let's relax a little bit, take a break. And in that he proceeded to narrate 30 narrations from the Salaf about how they didn't, this was him relaxing, he was joking with us, and he narrated about 30, I think I lost count after 20, he somewhere above 20, between 20 or 30, he just started firing off narrations about how the Salaf wouldn't even let men who had one wife sit in their circles of knowledge. There were some circles of knowledge, some muhaddithun didn't allow, especially North Africa, Africa, right? Hot blood, sahullah, they didn't allow if you had one wife, you weren't even allowed to sit in their circles of knowledge. He's like, you haven't protected yourself sufficiently yet, they would say. And the men who had two wives, they served tea, and you had to have 3 or 4 wives to sit and write. And that's it.
The sexual culture until now.
Until now, yeah, some places are like, in West Africa it's like that in some places.
There's something in lighter vein. In Bin Baz's class, some students, he asked.
Yeah.
And one of the students said, "No, Sheikh, I prefer Tawheed when it comes to marriage." Bin Baz said, "These are the cowards."
Yeah, he said this is the Tawheed of cowards. Yeah. The famous story, Imam Ibn Baz rahmatullahi said, Shaykh al-Islam fi zamanihi, he was once in a class and he was talking about the importance of men in our ummah, and that there's so many women that need husbands, and that we should explore polygyny and we should encourage it for our youth to do these things. And so one of the brothers that was sitting there, he said, Ya Shaykh, he said, Ana ala tawheed fi zawaj. He's like, I believe in tawheed in zawaj. Right? And he said, this is the tawheed of jubana. It's like, this is the tawheed of cowards. Right? It's not the tawheed of the shuja'a, the tawheed of the courageous. No, so my brothers, all jokes aside, right? Having 4 wives is not something like we should, for a lack of better words, it's not polygyny in Islam is not something that we as Muslim men should be romanticizing or fetishizing. It's not a fetish. We don't believe in fetishes in Islam. If you're going to marry a woman, you have to be responsible and uphold her, honor her. And then if you're going to marry another woman, you must uphold her and what? Honor her. Right? It's not the action of a man to marry another woman behind his wife's back. Okay? Does it make his marriage impermissible or like invalid? No. Do you need your wife's permission to marry another woman? No. But one time I was sitting in the Prophet's mosque, and one of our shuyukh, we were sitting with him, and a question came to him. He said, Shaykh, I married a woman. I married a woman behind her back, and she didn't know. And he said, stop the question. He interrupted the one reading the question. He said, stop. He said, what is this, my brothers? If you don't have the courage to marry a woman and marry another woman and let her know, then you're not qualified. You shouldn't be marrying another woman. That means you don't. What kind of lack of courage is this? What are you? He's like, what's this? You're playing with our sisters? And then when she gets upset, you get upset at her? Like you're upset with the hukum of Allah? No, you went behind her back. Anybody would be upset with that. An-Nasa'i rahmatullahi alayhi had 4 wives. Every single one of them knew about the other one. He didn't marry any woman in secret. To add to that, my brothers and sisters in Islam, this Imam was an ayah in ibadah. Look, we're running out of time already, and I haven't finished. Imam al-Nasa'i is famously narrated by Imam al-Dhahabi and others about him. And from those who narrate this, again, is Abu Ali al-Naysaburi, who is again who? Not just a student, one of the main students of Imam al-Nasa'i rahmatullahi alayhi. He said, كَانَ يَحُجُّ سَنَةً وَيُجَاهِدْ سَنَةً. He used to make Hajj 1 year, then he would go off and fight jihad for another year. Then the next year he'd go make Hajj, then the next year he'd fight jihad, and he would go like this until he died. You want to know what age he died at? Again, I have to cut this short because I had about 12 or 10 narrations from different scholars praising Imam al-Nasa'i rahmatullahi alayhi, but we'll skip that. Imam al-Nasa'i famously fought jihad and made Hajj simultaneously. He used to ping pong between these 2 acts of worship. Praying in the night, taking care of 4 women and children that he had with those 4 women, traveling for knowledge, teaching. He did all of that without phones, tablets, cars, planes. He did that on donkeys, camels, on his 2 feet. These were men. Imam al-Nasa'i rahmatullahi alayhi died at the age of around 88. He died at the age of what? Around, the scholars, they agree, around the age of 88. And so he did this until he died. Jihad, Hajj, Jihad, Hajj, Jihad, Hajj. When he finished Hajj, he would go to the Amir of wherever he was, the Muslim leader wherever he was. He's like, where are the borders of your land, the Muslim lands here? And they say, go. And he would go and he would sit at the borders of the Muslim lands and he would defend and he would fight. And then the next year when Hajj came, he would spend his wealth going for Hajj. And he was somebody who spent his wealth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He would spend it on his students. Again, from his Salaf, Imam Abu Hanifa, famously. Rich. But you wouldn't know from the way that he carried himself he had good clothes, but he wasn't wearing, jewelry and having spent it on his, you're not married, come here. He would give him dowry, go marry a woman. You need a house, you'd buy him a house. Right? So this is what our Salaf are like that, spending for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam al-Nasa'i, the same thing. So we said, Imam Abu Abdurrahman Ahmad bin Shu'aib al-Nasa'i died in the year 303 Hijri. He died in the year 303. So he's born in the year 215. So you do the math. 85 plus 3, like around 88. Some scholars say 89. Right? So he died in the year 303 Hijri in the city of Ramla, or near it, in Palestine, and he's buried in Jerusalem. He died in the month of Safar. Which is which month of the Islamic calendar? Anybody know? Safar. We're in what month now? What comes after Muharram? Ahsant. We're suffering, brothers, yeah? We're suffering, brothers. We know January, February, March, April, May, June, Madriyesh. This is a problem with us, my brothers and sisters in Islam. Could you ever imagine meeting a Christian who doesn't know what December is? Could you? Have you ever met a Christian? Whether he's from Timbuktu or Italy or anywhere else? Have you ever met a Catholic who doesn't know when December is? Or January or February or November? Whether he's Catholic or Greek Orthodox? Because they have ibadat attached to those months, and it's their calendar. Pope Gregory is the one who, and his Jesuit priests who figured out blah 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 blah. We don't have to get into the history of it. So it's called the Gregorian calendar after Pope Gregory the second or whatever his name was. But we have Muslims who don't know when Muharram begins, when it began, when it's going to end, what's the second or third month. And we have Muharram is a sacred month. Ibadat are rewarded more. Sins are punished, or the sins are also exaggerated in this month. Same with Dhul Qa'dah and Dhul Hijjah and Rajab. We should know the sacred months. Most Muslims, we know Ramadan. Hopefully you know Sha'ban, maybe because it comes before. Maybe you know Shawwal. You know Dhul Hijjah. But we have to know our months, my brothers and sisters in Islam. This is our calendar. And then we should say, and that the second thing we think of should be the Gregorian calendar. Right? Our teacher and elder, Sheikh Abul Abbas Musa Richardson, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, from the great du'at of our deen in the West. When he announces classes or does anything, he's in Pennsylvania, I believe. He's the Imam of Masjid al-Awwal in Pennsylvania. He never announces classes in Gregorian calendar. He doesn't. He puts it in a small bracket at the end. He said, we'll have a class starting this in Rajab, in this date. People was like, Sheikh, when is that again? And he lectures them. He's like, what's this? He's a convert. Musa Richardson. Musa Matthew Richardson, his name, convert brother. Hafidahullah ta'ala. But he's lecturing the people who are born in Islam about the importance of the Islamic calendars. Right? So my brothers, this is our deen. Our deen is attached to Islamic calendar. When we say we have to fast the 3 white days of the month, that's not January, February. The 3 white days of the Islamic calendar month. Correct? So we have to keep this in mind, my brothers and sisters in Islam. This is a huge thing. And this is another lecture for another day. Barakallahu fikum. طيب, and we'll suffice with this much about Imam Abu Abdurrahman Ahmad ibn Shu'aib ibn Ali al-Nasa'i rahimahullah ta'ala. I hope bidhna ta'ala that this was something that you guys benefited from, and that we are inspired by the likes of Imam al-Nasa'i. And inshallah next week will be the next Imam. نكتفي بهذا القدر في هذه الليلة وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والحمد لله رب العالمين.